Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine, and I'm here with your October astrological forecast. Before we get into the month ahead, I'd like to announce the October winner. As you know, as most of you know, every month we draw one person from the email list. If you're not on my email list, you can go to www.ricklevineastrologer.com and sign up for the email list. Then we will not overwhelm you with marketing information, and I will not sell this or give this information to anyone else, but I will use it to let you know when I have new things posted or when I have an event coming up that you may be interested in. This month's, and each month we pull one name out of the entire mailing list, the email list, for a free harmonics mini reading where I look at a natal chart and give a reading of not only the regular aspects, but of the harmonic aspects, of which I have been studying for many, many years. And this month's winner is Masumi Lorenz. And I believe Masumi, I hope you're saying your name right, is from Denmark. Congratulations, and you will be receiving an email from Gail, from my assistant Gail, and we will schedule your free reading as soon as we can. Now, before I move into the actual forecast for the month ahead, I do have a couple of events I want to share with you. The list is not long right now, but I want to make sure that you all know that on Friday evening, October 3rd, at 6:30 p.m., we'll be doing our monthly astrology night at Soul Food Coffee House here in my neighborhood in Redmond, Washington. And you can go to soulfoodcoffeehouse.com for more information, or you can go to my YouTube page. The link will be down below, as all the links that I mention here will be in the first pinned comment below. And the astrology night will be on my YouTube channel, and that's youtube.com/@RickLevine. The astrology night is a monthly event. We do it on the first Friday evening of the months when I am in town, and when I am at my home office in Redmond. And we broadcast it live. You can watch it later if you can't make it. If you live in the neighborhood, or if you're either in Redmond or Seattle or in the area, the event is open, and stop on by. It's a lovely community event at a lovely place, and that's 6:30 p.m. on this Friday, October 3rd. I say this Friday. I'm recording this on the evening of September 29th. A couple of events coming up. The closest one in time is just a couple of weeks off, but there's still time for you to be involved in it if you want to. And that is OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, is holding its retreat in Park City, Utah. That's up in the mountains outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. That's the home of the Sundance Film Festival. And this year, the theme is the cosmic shift, connecting in a new era. The thing that makes the OPA conferences or retreats unique is that for 3 days, you work in a small group with one particular astrologer. There are several different offerings, but the immersion tracks are with Lynn Bell, Rachel Lang, Celeste Brooks, or myself. And my immersion track is on improving client sessions. And rather than focusing on a client session as some sort of performance that the astrologer does, we're going to look at the how to change some of the dynamics of traditional chart readings. And we use the charts of the participants as the curriculum. This is a small group. It'll be limited to about 8 people at the most, 8 or 10 people. And it doesn't really matter what specific techniques you use. This will increase your ability and the competence and confidence that you have in doing chart work. And you can find out more information on this by going to opaastrology.org. And there's complete information on all the various tracks, including viewing the night sky and some peer group review sessions and client work. And so there's all kinds of things offered there. And I look forward to seeing some of you in Park City, Utah. And that is October 15th through the 19th. That's coming up rather quickly. And then on November 20th, I will be back in Goa for my initiation into astrology. And this will be from November 20th through December 2nd in a very beautiful place in the south end of Goa, India, just up from a beach on the Arabian Sea at an Ayurvedic healing spa. It's the fourth time I've done an event here, and this is through Heaven and Earth Workshops. You can find out more here by going to heavenandearthworkshops.com. The event is pretty full, but there's room for a few more people. But of course, this is coming up pretty quickly. And it being in India, if you're thinking about going, this is the time to follow through. Take a look at the website. There's a day-by-day curriculum and activities schedule, and I know I will see some of you there. Then a brand new event that's just been put on the calendar is that at the end of February, this is 2026 we're into now, the end of February, on February 27th, I'll be returning to the Red Tail Studio in Buellton, California. Buellton is just slightly north of Santa Barbara, and we have a spot there that we did a course last year in February, and it was such a magical and cool place to do some work that we are booking another event there on February 27th through March 5th. That's Friday evening, February 27th through Thursday, March 5th. And this is very specifically a 6-day course, and it's how to read a birth chart. So if you've been reading your daily horoscopes or watching YouTube videos or reading books about astrology and feel like you can't quite put it all together, or even if you've never really even looked at a birth chart, at a horoscope chart, this is an intensive workshop that will provide you with the necessary tools to make sense of a natal horoscope. And step by step, we're going to explore the planets, the signs, the houses, aspects, and this is a full immersion course. And it's a 6-day journey into astrology, and we will be using your own chart as a tool for the work that you will be doing for these 6 days. And this is also produced by Heaven and Earth Workshops. You can go to heavenandearthworkshops.com and scroll down to how to read a birth chart. And then the last thing I want to mention here today is the Mystery School at Sea. And this is from March 20th to March 30th. And this is a 10-day voyage that's going to on a luxury liner that will carry us across sacred lands and weave together some ancient wisdom, some transformative experiences, and really enable some connections at a deep soul level. We're going to be exploring the teachings of mystery schools, including things like extraterrestrial contact, alternative or hidden histories, and all in all, the deeper truths of reality, while visiting sacred sites in Athens and Heraklion, Rhodes, Kavala, Thessaloniki, Ephesus in Turkey. And this is going to be a very exciting week. And you can find out more about this and register at mysteryschoolatSea.com, all one word. And the link is down below in the first comment. That's it as far as the upcoming events. Now, before I leave, I should also mention, of course, that Norwalk will be the last weekend in May again, and I will be back at Norwalk after missing it. This will be, I think, my 33rd or 34th Norwalk. Norwalk is the Northwest Astrology Conference held here in Seattle, and you can find out more about that at norwalk.net. And this conference sells out. If you're interested in this, get your registration in early or you will not be able to attend. But there is also virtual attendance. The conference is both done live in person and also made available for those who are unable to make it physically. And that's pretty much it for now. So, with no further ado, I'm going to jump into the astrology of October of 2025. Every month when I do these, I kind of have to project ahead, and it's not just a matter of looking at a planet and seeing where it's going, but really trying to describe the energetic lay of the land. And when I look ahead at October, I'm struck by the fact that we are still at a major turning point. And you've heard me say this for months now, but I think that over the next few months, the ability to shift the direction in which we seem to be heading, we humanity, that ability to shift that direction is going to begin to wane. We're going to lose the ability to make the changes that right now we still can make. And even though for many people, for most people, it feels like things are not going on the planet, not going well, that humanity is not going in a sustainable direction, that things are out of whack, that there's a great bifurcation or polarity based upon how people think we should be moving ahead, that there's a great disparity for many people between how they see the potential of the future and what they see or what we see when we look around us as to what's unfolding, whether that's economically, politically, socially, in pretty much on culturally on all kinds of levels, from a very personal community level all the way up to the global situation. I think it's important to understand that the astrology of these times meaning the summer and autumn of 2025, really show that we are in a flow forward, but just like personal physical development as a child, there are spurts that become where growth becomes very obvious. And then there are times where growth is not obvious at all, or it feels like nothing is happening, or it even feels like we're slipping backwards. And then all of a sudden, there's another growth spurt. Anyone who's parented a child has seen this process of the kind of jumps ahead that occur. And I believe from looking at the astrology of these times that we are just in front of one of those spurts. It may feel to many people like we're in the middle of that already, but we're not. We're at a period where there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of things that are kind of pushing our awareness off into the future, but it's not being reflected by what's happening around us, whereby many people's perceptions, rather than going into the future, where we're returning to the past, we're looking backward and trying to make things the way they were, rather than looking forward and trying to make things in a new way that they can be by realizing our potential. Now, of course, when we put this into an astrological framework, it's easy to explain by the fact that the sun and the moon, which never move retrograde, they're always moving direct, but the sun and the moon and Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and even Jupiter are all moving direct. meaning that they're all pushing into new territory. They're all moving us into places where we haven't been. And yet at the same exact time, we have the outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and Eris are all in retrograde, meaning that they're in their phase where being closer to Earth and even louder, like a radio station is louder when it's closer to the receiver, planets go retrograde when they're closer to Earth. And all the outer planets right now, the deeper rhythm, kind of like the bass drum and the bass notes in an orchestra, or even in a band, the bass player in a band, which really creates the underlying foundation. All these planets appear to be moving backwards, which is what retrograde is. They don't actually move backwards, but it looks like they're moving backwards. And in a way, they often tie us up into energy systems that we've already experienced as if we are moving backward in time. But of course, and I've said this in many instances, it's like standing in the ocean at the edge, and the tide may be going out, but the waves coming in still feel like they're coming in. And so there's always cycles within cycles within cycles. And what's important to understand October is that the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars and Jupiter are all moving ahead. They're moving into the future, so to speak. Whereas Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and Eris are all retrograde. And that is giving us the inability to move into the future fully, because it's almost like the planets are requiring us to do a remedial study of those things that we missed when the planets were last moving direct or into new territory. Let's bring up the chart for October 1st. I'm recording this, I think, as I said earlier, on the evening of the 29th, but we'll begin with October 1st, and all the charts that we'll be looking at, with the exception of the new moon and full moon charts, will all be for noon of whatever day it is that we're looking at. And we'll be looking at charts for noon Pacific time. Actually, now that is Pacific Daylight Time. And so you need to adjust the time zones for wherever you live. All the charts that we'll be looking at, that we will be looking at, will have an Aries rising, meaning that it's a natural horoscope, meaning that there is no ascendant or midheaven, because wherever you are on the planet, that will change the houses or change the ascendant and midheaven, the cardinal points. And so we'll just be looking at the planets, what signs they're in, and the aspects that they are making to one another. At noon on Wednesday, October 1st, and even though I am recording this a day and a half earlier, I'm going to always reference the chart that we're looking at as today. So we are looking at the chart for noon of October 1st, and today, October 1st, because that's the chart we are looking at, we can see that at noon, the moon is at 29.5 degrees, 29 degrees and 33 minutes of Capricorn. And the moon actually will move into Aquarius at just 12:51 p.m. This is important because as the moon moves into Aquarius, it's going to pick up on its conjunction to Pluto. And Pluto is an especially important player throughout the month of October, because Pluto actually turns Pluto is retrograde, and Pluto turns direct. And when Pluto turns direct mid-month, the actual day that Pluto turns direct is on October 13th. But because Pluto moves so slowly, and on the first day of the month, Pluto is at 1 degree and 24 minutes of Aquarius. That's like just about 1.5 degrees of Aquarius. If we were to look at Pluto's position on November 1st, 1 month from today, Pluto will be at 1 degree Aquarius in 27 minutes, just in effect, just 3 minutes away from where it is now. That's 1/20th of a degree. So even though Pluto, it makes its technical station to turn direct on October 13th, Pluto ain't moving all month. It's in effect holding still. And and when a planet is relatively slow moving or stationing still, it actually has more strength. It has more power. It's almost like like a ballerina or a ballet dancer who is turning around doing pirouettes. And what they'll do is they'll focus on one thing, and the body turns around gradually, but the head will snap around so it maintains focus on one thing. And it's almost like that when a planet turns retrograde or direct, it stops, and it's almost like everything else is moving around it. Now, remember that Pluto is in a trine relationship right now with Uranus. On October 1st, the Uranus trine Pluto is less than 1/4 of a degree from being exactly trine. Now, they make their exact trine for the first of 5 times next July of 2026. And this Uranus Pluto trine is going to be like the most important underpinning fundamental piece of what's going on already this year, but next year and the several years to follow. Into this, we also have Neptune and Saturn. Now, Neptune at the beginning of October is at 0.5 degrees of Aries, which means that Saturn itself, I'm sorry, that Neptune itself is within a 0.5 degree of both Uranus and Pluto. It's actually within a degree right now. It's about 3/4 of a degree to Uranus and a little bit less than a degree of exact in its sextile to Pluto. This alignment between Uranus and Pluto, Uranus trine Pluto, with Neptune at the midpoint sextiling both of them, and actually Saturn there also. Now, Saturn has retrograded back into Pisces. And what's really important to understand, October, this will become even more important in November, is that Neptune, which is still retrograde, remember, all the outer planets are retrograde. Pluto will be turning direct mid-month, but Neptune will retrograde from Aries back into Pisces on October 22nd. And in some ways, that's going to reconfirm this whole notion that we're not making progress forward. But it's not what's ultimately going on. It's just what feels like what's going on the surface. And it's really important to differentiate between those two pieces, because otherwise we can become a lot more discouraged than we might otherwise be. But it's also really important to understand that inaction on our parts individually, whether we're talking about action in personal relationships or action in projects that we're working on, either for our own creative endeavors or for spiritual pursuit or projects at work, or whether we're talking about global or political issues. If we don't express ourselves and take part in the process, then the status quo will be maintained. And obviously, for many of us, it's really important that we really keep our voices out in the open. And because the Uranus is trining Pluto with Neptune and Saturn sextiling them in between, that kind of sets in motion a flow of energy that on one hand can make us lazy, or one hand make us feel like it doesn't matter what we do, what's going on is what will continue to be going on. and that's the illusion. And you'll see how this unfolds as the month moves on. But when Neptune moves back into Pisces, then Saturn and Neptune will both be back in Pisces. Saturn was in Pisces for the last couple, 2.5 years before it tipped into Aries, and Saturn tipped into Aries back at the end of May of this year, 2025. And Saturn then re-entered back into Pisces on September 1st. But Saturn will move forward. It'll turn direct the end of November. And then by February 13th, Saturn will move back into Aries, where it'll then stay for the next couple of years. And that will really begin to push us into the future. Whereas right now, we're still holding on to old ways of thinking and kind of trying to maintain a status quo, whether it's what we want or not. That's what's being enforced on us. Now, into this mixture, we have Neptune, and Neptune entered Aries back at the end of March. And then Neptune turned retrograde back July 4th was when Neptune turned retrograde. And what will happen is that Neptune will turn direct the beginning, actually, December 10th is when Neptune will turn direct. And Neptune will, and in that period of time, Neptune will back into Pisces. It'll do that on October 22nd, this month. And so you will have Neptune and Saturn back in Pisces. But then once Neptune turns direct in December, then it will re-enter Aries the end of January, on January 26th, and we will have the exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction on February 20th. So this is what is really being set up right now. And yet through October, it may feel like we're just having to deal with more of the same of what happened in August and in September. And it's not, this is a double negative, I understand that. It's not like nothing is happening, but it's like the same things are happening with new layers, with new characters, new players, new issues. But we may not feel like we're making progress with all these planets going retrograde. There are some things that occur during the month, though, that will change the nature of this deeper event of the Uranus in Gemini trining Saturn in trining Pluto in Aquarius, and the Saturn and Neptune at the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries. One of the things is today, on October 1st, when the moon shifts signs and enters Aquarius, it will then line up with Pluto. And this is really a significant thing, not because the moon is lining up with Pluto, it does that once a month, but because the moon is conjoining Pluto, it'll do that at about 3:30 this afternoon on Wednesday, October 1st. But as it does that, the moon will also be trining Uranus, and it'll also be making the sextile to Neptune, and today also making the sextile to Saturn. So the moon is an important player today, kind of setting up the energy of the month. The other thing that we should note is that Mercury at roughly 22 and a half degrees of Libra is making an exact square to Jupiter at 22 and a half degrees, 22 degrees 34 minutes actually, of Cancer. And when Mercury squares Jupiter, this is part of another process that will play through over the next few days, because first of all, Mercury square Jupiter is is overconfidence, overstating. It may be that we are over eager to represent something, and it's not necessarily about lying, but we can exaggerate, or we can feel like there's a sense of of pushing an envelope and pushing it farther and farther until it's too far. Now, the other thing that is being set up, though, is that over the days ahead, first Mercury and then Jupiter will be making aspects with Chiron and Eris. And this Chiron Eris piece is an important piece because Chiron and Eris both move slowly. Chiron takes about 50 years to make one run around the sun, to make one complete cycle. And Chiron and Eris takes 500 years or so to make one complete journey around the sun. And right now, they are both retrograde. They have already made their first of three conjunctions, and they will make their second of three conjunctions in October. And that conjunction happens exactly on October 8th. And so you can see here on October 1st that Chiron and Eris are just 15 minutes apart. That's a quarter of a degree. And what's interesting is that over the days ahead, Mercury will make oppositions to Eris and Chiron, and Jupiter will make squares to Eris and Chiron as Eris and Chiron are making a conjunction. Now, the reason why this is so significant is that Eris is often called the sower of discord. Eris is Mars's sister. But Eris is really interested in seeing what's being excluded so that it actually can include it. In fact, it's been called the planet of radical exclusion and radical inclusion. And as Eris lines up with Chiron, Chiron is sometimes called the wounded healer because it's how we take those things that hurt individually on some level, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual or simply existential pain or angst, and we project it outward so that we try to heal others from our own pain, which makes us feel better in the process. But remember, Chiron was a teacher. And as Chiron and Eris come together, there's something here about the potential of facing our own individual or collective wounds and learning or teaching and overcoming them through radical forgiveness or inclusion. And this will be exacerbated or even overstimulated as first Mercury and then Jupiter make those oppositions and squares to Eris and Chiron. Mercury makes um, the square to Jupiter here on October 1st, but then Mercury will make oppositions to Eris and Chiron on the 3rd, and on October 3rd, we'll get there in just a moment. And we also have Jupiter making the square to Chiron, but not until October 23rd. So this energy is kind of with us where we can be overconfident or pushing false confidence onto others. And I think that can be one of the traps of this month. So let's move this ahead now to October 2nd. We can see now that the moon has moved ahead from being at the very end of Capricorn, and now we can see that the moon is in mid Aquarius. On October 2nd, we also have Venus making a square and a half to Pluto. Now, this is an aspect that some astrologers don't use. For those of you who've been following me, you know that half squares and one and a half squares, the semi-square and the sesqui-square, are every bit as strong as a square. They're sometimes they take more exacting. They're more motivational even than squares. But as this Venus makes this sesqui square with Pluto today, mid-afternoon at 2:19 p.m. exactly, there may be things that surface from the hidden realms, from the Plutonic realms. There's power plays and power struggles here that kind of mess with what we want. And so that's one of the backdrops of today's energy. Then as and we can also see here, though, that Mercury, and now at 24 degrees of Libra, has inched closer to its exact opposition to the Eris and Chiron conjunction, which are also moving closer and closer together. We move now to October 3rd, and we can see now that Mercury at 25 degrees, 25 and a half degrees at noon of Libra, is now partile, meaning same degree, 25 degrees of Aries, where Eris and Chiron are, and these exact oppositions occur at 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. because Mercury moves so quickly. It's really sweeping through that opposition to Eris and Chiron, and there's a sense here of being in touch with with our pain, and maybe even communicating it, maybe even being giving it voice in a way that's maybe focusing on underdogs or excluded or marginalized people, and I think that there's some real breakthroughs here that can begin to happen. But remember that Jupiter is still in the picture, and so it's easy to think that we are accomplishing more than we might actually be accomplishing because of that false sense of overconfidence. Now, another thing that is happening here on the third is that the moon changes signs. The moon moves into Pisces at 7:07 p.m. And again, all times are Pacific Daylight Time. And as the moon moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces, we may become a little more empathic or empathetic. We may shift our energy, and instead of feeling a little detached from those things that are out there, we may feel more connected. But then again, often what happens is that some people can just go into denial about things, that so they don't feel, or they don't connect. But I think it's important as we approach the evening today. I think it's more and more important for us to just be aware, to do the best we can to stay aware of how others might feel, and instead of being argumentative or polarizing, to try to understand how other people have to experience reality that might be very different than the way that we do in our own world. We get to Saturday, the 4th, and we have Venus now aligning with the south node of the moon. When planets align with the nodal axis, often this reminds us that there's more going on than meets the eye. There's a sense here of Venus going over the point of the south node that may bring back memories of things in the past, or even again the difficulties that we faced, and we need to focus, instead of on the past, or instead of slipping back into what might have seemed comfortable in the past, to push our energies ahead, rather than going into Virgo in analysis, because Venus and the south node are in Virgo. To remember that the moon in Pisces is still encouraging us to be compassionate and considerate and kind. And in fact, over the next day, the moon in Pisces will catch up to the nodal axis itself. Let's move this ahead to the 5th. And we can see now that the moon at 24 degrees of Pisces has moved over that north node, which is at 18 degrees of Pisces. And the moon lined up with the north node kind of gives us a little bit of directionality as to where the future may go for us. But this is a tricky situation because the moon lines up with the north node just after midnight this morning at about 2:20 a.m. And then the moon will actually join up with Saturn. And so we can see here on the 5th that the moon is not only joined up with the nodal axis, and that occurred at 4:33 a.m. But we also can see that the moon is inching towards its conjunction with Saturn here on the 5th. And that occurs at 5:29 p.m. And so it's almost like we have a compass. We can kind of feel like we know where we need to go. But then as the moon gets closer and closer to Saturn, it's like we have blockages. We realize how hard we have to work to get to where we're going. It may feel discouraging or even disillusioning, but by later in the evening, by 9:47 p.m. on Sunday the 5th, the moon actually moves from Pisces into Aries at 10:28. I'm sorry, at 9:47 p.m. And by 10:28 p.m., the moon is lined up with Neptune. So this is a shift of energies because now we're feeling that anything is possible again. We can be discouraged because, again, Neptune brings out the fantasy, the illusions, but it also can be highly inspiring. And it really depends on how we choose to use that energy, depending upon which way we go. That is on Sunday the 5th. We go to Monday the 6th, and we can see now midday that the moon on the 6th is at 8 degrees of Aries. We're coming into a full moon, and the moon is actually full at 8:47 p.m. We'll look at that chart in just a moment, but we can also see here at noon that Mercury is now at 0 degrees of Scorpio. The Mercury moved from Libra, where it's been, and encouraging us to communicate diplomatically. It's moved from Libra into Scorpio, where Mars already is. And this is a shift of energy because now our words may be a lot more pointed than they were. Our perspectives are sharper. We're less willing to play the nice guy or the nice person. And as Mercury moves into Scorpio at 9:40 a.m. here on the 6th, it will also be coming closer and closer to its square to Pluto that is exact tomorrow morning at 7:40 a.m. So we're getting this shift of energy that brings us right up to the full moon, which is at 8:47 p.m. The full moon occurs at 14 degrees of Aries and 8 minutes opposite the sun at 14 degrees of Libra in 8 minutes. The full moon here is a moon about relationship because the sun in Libra is focusing on the balance between the inside and the outside, between me and you, between us and them, between any polarity that you want to choose. And yet the moon in Aries is saying, yes, but I'm feeling it from my perspective. And so there's this polarity, maybe one of the strongest full moon polarities, with that moon in Aries opposing the sun in Libra. But it's not about the sun and moon that makes this particular full moon so strong. It's about Mercury. Remember, we already talked about Mercury moving from Libra into Scorpio. And we can see here at the full moon that there's a few things going on. First of all, the Mercury is square to Pluto, and Mercury square Pluto at the full moon is less than 1 degree of orb. And as I mentioned, that'll be exact tomorrow morning. But for all practical purposes, our words, which are saying things that if we're speaking the truth, whether it hurts or not. And there can be reaction Pluto that is very powerful and very profound. But remember, that Pluto is still being trined by Uranus, and that Pluto trine Uranus is still about 1/4 of a degree. It's 18 minutes of arc, so it's somewhere between 1/4 of a degree and 1/3 of a degree. But the point here is that Mercury which is making a square to Pluto on one side, Uranus making a trine to Pluto on the other side, and therefore Mercury is making a quincunx with Uranus. But Mercury is not only making a quincunx with Uranus, it's making a quincunx with Neptune also. That Mercury at 0, almost 1 degree of Scorpio at the time of the full moon, Neptune at 0.5 degrees of Aries, and Uranus at just 1 degree of Gemini. These 3 points are making what's called a finger of God, or a yod, which is basically, it says, the energy of Uranus, that sudden change, the awakening, the radical, the revolutionary, working with Neptune, the dreams, the illusions, the fantasies, are coming together through that Mercury in Scorpio and expressing the intensity and the volatility in language, in words. And yet I should say that sometimes Mercury in Scorpio gains its power not by what it says, but by that which is not said. Anyway, but Mercury making that square to Pluto is making this whole thing rather difficult. This is a complicated energy scenario that has everything to do with the full moon relationship, and also everything to do with the Jupiter still coming into the square to the Eris Chiron conjunction, which is now just minutes of arc apart. Remember that Eris Chiron is a slow-moving transit that will be exact on the 8th. But for all practical purposes, it might as well be exact today, because there's so much else going on that it is really a strong point in this full moon. Complicated full moon energy. It's really important to be aware of what we say and what we don't say, and to use our words wisely rather than just speaking without thinking that words have consequence. And here on the 7th, we can see that that Mercury is making its exact square to Pluto, and that occurs, as I said earlier, at 7:40 a.m. But Mercury is also still making, the aspects to Neptune and Uranus, so that Yod is still in play, that finger of God with Mercury at the apex of it. Meanwhile, we should also note that the moon at 23 degrees of Aries at noon on Tuesday the 7th is coming into a conjunction with Eris and Chiron, as Jupiter is still slowly moving toward its exact square. So we have the moon squaring Jupiter at 11:23 a.m., and then the moon joining up with Chiron at 2:40, Chiron and Eris, just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. And so there's a lot focused here on that whole problem of the disenfranchised, the marginalized, and how their pain may be something that we can actually address. But we have to be careful because of the square from Jupiter about making everything seem better or be looking better than it is. Yet by 10:12 p.m. this evening, the moon moves from Aries into Taurus. And when it does, I think things stabilize for a day or two. And let's move this chart now to the 8th. We can see that the moon now is in Taurus. And the moon in Taurus will be making oppositions to Mercury and to Mars today, increasing our awareness about the simplicity of how we might feel the moon in Taurus, and the complexity of what we need to say. That would be the Mercury in Scorpio, and the complexity and the volatility of what our actions may be, and that's the Mars in Scorpio. And the moon's opposition to Mercury occurs at 2:14 a.m., and the moon's opposition to Mars occurs at 4:15 p.m. But the saving grace today is the fact that Venus still in Virgo, at 23 degrees of Virgo, is making an exact sextile with Jupiter. And this actually alleviates our feelings a bit. It actually can be a bit of a feel good. It enables us to focus our energy on the positive, and to basically cooperate with others in a way that sometimes may be a little bit more difficult to do. So there is some potential today, for some real positive movement if we choose to take advantage of it. Then we move ahead to the 9th. And on the 9th, I think the most important thing that we have going, is that Mars makes a square and a half with Saturn. Mars-Saturn connections are often difficult, but Mars is hot, Saturn is cold. Mars in Scorpio is at home in its traditional nighttime rulership, nighttime home in its nocturnal domicile or home. And its square and a half to Saturn might be running against walls, might be, there's some management here of how we control our energy or don't. And it may be that we hit the brakes too hard and we should have gone more forward, or it may be that we hit the gas too hard and we maybe should have slowed down. But we do need to pay attention, to how we're expending our energy with that Mars making its square and a half, um, um, to um, to Saturn. That's here on the 9th. The other thing that occurs on the 9th is that later in the day at 10:11 p.m., the moon moves from Taurus into Gemini, and as it does, it will line up with Uranus at 11:48 p.m. This evening, Thursday evening, just before midnight. And this is a bit of excitement, a bit of destabilization. And I think now we're maybe feeling some of the energy of where we might go with all of this, after feeling a bit restrained, and feeling a little bit uncertain as to whether we should go ahead or pull back. That's the Mars go ahead, the Saturn pull back. I think that we're actually, can gain some traction here. That is on the 9th. The 10th, interestingly enough, is a relatively quiet day from exact aspects. But the moon does make a trine with Pluto very, very early in the morning, just after it makes that conjunction with Uranus. And so there's still some movement here. But for the rest of the day, it's like, here on the 10th, there's nothing exact happening. And that doesn't mean that nothing happens. In fact, it often means that we can kind of take care of stuff that we let lag or lapse earlier, or anticipate what's coming. And one of the things that's coming is the fact that we have Venus today on Friday the 10th making an opposition with Saturn. That's not exact until 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, 4:10 a.m. tomorrow morning. But remember yesterday's exact Mars sesqui-square to Saturn? Well, that's still in play. That Mars square and a half to Saturn. And the thing about that is that Mars will also make, a half square, to Venus, and that will come into play and be exact as Venus opposes Saturn tomorrow on the 11th. Let's move ahead to the 11th. And we can now see that Venus at noon is slightly, ahead of its opposition. The exact opposition occurs, as I mentioned earlier, at 4:10 a.m. But what's also happening here is that Mars made that square and a half, to Saturn on the 9th, and then Venus will make a half square to Mars that's exact on the 13th. So that Mars, in relationship to the Venus-Saturn opposition. And Venus-Saturn oppositions are typically not a lot of fun, unless we can maintain a vision of the long haul, the discipline, the holding back to get to where we want to go, because Venus, in some ways, can be restrained by Saturn. This can make a love that lasts, but it may not be as fun and as free-flowing and as romantic or exciting as, let's say, a Venus-Uranus conjunction may be. And as Venus over the next few days moves from Virgo into Libra, we will get that Venus trining Uranus. It's already kind of out there, but today on the 11th, we're getting the heaviness of the Venus-Saturn and the Mars making a half square to Venus, even though that's not exact for another couple days, and the Mars making the square and a half to Saturn, even though that was exact a couple days ago. This energy is all in play here on the 13th. In fact, I'm sorry, on the 11th. But in fact, as we move ahead, when we go to the 12th, again, there's no outer planet or real planet aspects, meaning that aside from lunar aspects, there are no aspects that are exact on the 11th. But the moon does move from Gemini into Cancer, and it does that at 11:37 p.m. on Saturday night at the very, very end of the day. So that when we look at the chart for the 12th, we can see that the moon by noon is already at 7 degrees of Cancer. And we also now can see that Venus has moved slightly past its opposition to Saturn, but it has not yet reached its opposition to Neptune. That won't happen until Monday and Tuesday, when Venus moves from Virgo into Libra. But meanwhile, Venus is moving opposite the halfway point between Saturn and Neptune. And so this is exciting and confusing and depressing and illuminating all at once, because we're beginning to get this feeling of this grand trine that will become exact once Venus moves into Libra, but it's already really close. I mean, Venus is just a couple of degrees away from its trine to Uranus and its trine to Pluto, but it is very close in its opposition to Saturn and Neptune, meaning that it's almost exact in its opposition to the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. This is a very profound energy system here, and I think it's beginning to show what could be around the bend. And as we move from the 12th to the 13th, we will be able to see a few things develop. Number one, Venus midday is at 29 degrees of Virgo in 53 minutes. But what that means is that Venus will move into Libra just a couple of hours from now, from noon, at 2:18 p.m. And when Venus makes that switch into Libra, it will pick up much more by sign and by energy to the other two air planets, Venus in Libra, Venus that will be air, and it will pick up on the Uranus in Gemini air and the Pluto in Aquarius air, making this kind of self-referential flow of energy in this grand equilateral triangle or grand trine that has to do with thinking. We can justify pretty much anything right now. And yet you can also now see how close that Mars semi-square to Venus is. And that Mars semi-square to Venus was exact at 2 a.m. this morning. And that Venus is very significant because it's approaching the opposition to Neptune, while Mercury and Mars together are playing with the semi and sesqui-squares to Venus, the semi-squares to Venus, and the sesqui-squares to Saturn and Neptune. And this particular pattern is very important because that Mercury and Mars now are not comfortable. They are, in fact, exacerbating the feeling that we have that things are not going okay. And weirdly enough, at the same time, that Venus is also moving into a position where we can justify anything because of the grand trine, making actually what's called a kite, where we have a grand trine and planets at the opposition point to one of the points on the grand trine. That would be the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. That's the way out. And it's by finding a balance, by making the imagination, that would be Neptune, real, that would be Saturn, or by looking at what seems to be real, Saturn, and realizing that the ideal is not what's happening, and figuring out what little things we can do, or big things perhaps, to create the ideal situation instead of what is actually physically going on out there in the real world. Venus is opposed Neptune exactly at 6:16 p.m. And this is high level illusion, romance, magic. It's spiritual. But again, I think the important thing is understanding the relationship between Saturn and Neptune, especially since they will be making their exact conjunction next February at 0 degrees of Aries. And this is all kind of getting us ready for what's down the road. The other thing that happens today on the 13th, as if it wasn't already busy enough, is that Pluto makes its exact technical station, meaning that from Earth's point of view, it looks like Pluto is not moving. Pluto is stationing direct, getting ready to move direct. But again, it's 1 degree, 22 minutes of Aquarius. It'll only move 2 minutes of arc forward up to 27. It'll move 5 minutes of arc, which is 1/12 of a degree over the next 2 weeks. So even though it's moving forward, it's barely moving at all. And again, it makes that Pluto a really strong point. That's a counterpoint, if you will. The other thing that's happening is that Mars, which has made the sesqui-square, the square and a half to Saturn, by the 14th, Mars is now making an exact sesqui-square, square and a half to Neptune. And so now our actions are combining with magic of illusion. We might do things that other people misinterpret. This is a really important thing because it shows us the power of dreams and imagination, whether they lead us towards something positive or negative. The other thing is that we can see now that Venus at 1 degree of Libra is now making those exact trines with both Uranus and Pluto. Venus makes its exact trine with Uranus at 7:09 a.m. and its exact trine with Pluto at 4:44 p.m. But all day today, we're working on that magical grand trine, even though we have the exacerbating Mercury and Mars making still the half square to Venus and the square and a half to Saturn and Pluto. Complicated energy, to say the least. The other thing here on the 14th is that the moon, having yesterday lined up with Jupiter, again, maybe magnifying some confidence, the moon moves into Leo. And here on the 14th, we can see that the moon is already at noon at 4 degrees of Leo. The moon moved into Leo at 3:47 a.m. And as such, it opposed Pluto. That might have stirred up some energy, but we're now in a place for the next couple of days where we may be more likely to express what it is that we're feeling than to just let it lay low. The other thing that's happening is that the sun is moving closer and closer toward its square to Jupiter. Remember, we began the month with Mercury making that square to Jupiter, but now as the sun is coming into the square to Jupiter, still a couple of days away, it's not exact until the 16th. As the sun moves into that square to Jupiter, it'll also move into the oppositions to Chiron and Eris, and stir up energy that was stirred up back at the beginning of the month. That is October 14th. As we move to the 15th, we have another day where there's no exact outer planet connections. Venus is moving away from its exact trines with Uranus and Pluto and away from its exact opposition to Neptune. Um, Mars is moving away from its sesqui and sesqui squares. We do have today on the 15th, we do have the moon moving through mid Leo, making its exact squares with Mercury and Mars. And so that Mercury and Mars are still not home free. There's still something here about how our words and our actions are not fitting in easily with everything else that we would like to see in the outer world. That's on the 15th. On the 16th, the energy shifts a bit here because the moon moves into Virgo at 11:05 a.m. on Thursday, the 16th. The thing is that we're coming from a couple of days of wanting to express what it is we're feeling to a couple of days where we may be more inclined to only express those things that we really feel sure about. The moon in Virgo is a bit more tentative. And as the moon moves through that 0 1 degree point of Virgo, it will make quincunxes with Neptune and Pluto, again, making another one of those yods, those fingers of God. And the moon here is the major player, but it's like the moon, how we're feeling, our emotional reaction just doesn't feel all that comfortable. It's like there's stuff going on that makes us feel like we can't do exactly the right thing. The other thing about the moon moving into Virgo that is that it will be square to Uranus. And as it's square to Uranus, it might stir up stuff that plays back to when Venus first moved into Libra and made that trine to Pluto and Uranus. And we may have acted on things that kind of were out of the box and out of our normal range of experience. And today on the 16th, as the moon squares Uranus, we may again feel like we should have said less or done less or not have acted on something that we actually acted on, especially because as we get to the 16th, the sun is also making its exact square to Jupiter, and that's at not exact until 10:42 p.m., but we'll be feeling this all day. And also Jupiter is coming into its exact squares with Chiron and Eris. The fact of the matter is that it's 1 degree. It's right around 1 degree of orb in its squares to Chiron and Eris today at noon. But the sun is also moving in its opposition to Chiron and Eris, and that will be exact over the next couple of days. And again, this is complicated energy because we feel like we want things to be okay, but we see what's wrong and we may overcompensate. That's the Jupiter point. And yet that sun in Libra really is seeking a way, a diplomatic way to settle some of the energies, but it may be that those solutions are a bit out of reach. As we move to the 17th, we can see now that the sun is at that exact opposition to Chiron. Don't need to say a whole lot more about that. Its opposition to Chiron is exact at 4:40 p.m., and then its opposition to Eris is exact tomorrow morning at just 19 minutes after midnight on the 18th. Let's move ahead to the 18th. All of this is coming into culmination with the sun's opposition to Chiron and Eris. In fact, we may again be aware of things in the past in our childhood, not even personally, not limited to things personal, but maybe even historical, culturally, realizing that it's hard to get out of old habits and old patterns that set up problems that have to do with people's suffering. And it may even encourage us to, in a higher moment, to perform acts of compassion and or healing. But it's, again, a complicated day because the sun is also making quincunxes that are not exact until tomorrow with Saturn, and then with Neptune. The moon is also making a quincunx with Chiron and Eris. And so the energies here have some discomfort attached to them, even though we still might overcompensate and make things out to be better than they truly are. That is on the 18th. Oh, and also, I don't know that I mentioned that the moon on the 18th moves into Libra, and as it does, it'll be following the same path that Venus took, because the moon, as it moves into Libra, the moon moves into Libra at 9:01 p.m., but just before it does, it'll oppose Saturn. The moon will oppose Neptune at 9:10 p.m., and then it'll trine Uranus and Pluto yet before the day is out at 10:30, up till midnight, Uranus, then Pluto. And again, it just puts us through another round of the everything working, the potential of what could happen, and yet the flow of energy that's going on right now that we may feel unable to stop or to change its path. As we move to the 19th, the moon moving through Libra will line up with Venus, and it does that just before noon. You can see here at noon, the moon and Venus are at 7 degrees of Libra. And so this may be a moment of, or a few hours of feeling good energy. And yet we also have, here on the 19th, the sun is making its exact quincunx with Saturn. It's like it doesn't matter how much we do, it might feel like we can't get it quite right. We also have Mercury catching up with Mars today, and that occurs at 11:51 p.m. And this is an alignment between how we think and what we do. This has been building for a few days, but again, this Mercury-Mars conjunction doesn't play well with the rest of the chart. It's still struggling to find a way to fit in. And yet, intriguingly, over the days ahead, as Mercury, moving faster than Mars, first makes trines with Saturn and then with Jupiter and then with Saturn, and then Mercury will move into Sagittarius and make a trine with Neptune, followed by Mars doing the same things. There is potential for getting things right over the days and even a couple of weeks ahead. That is on the 19th. We move to the 20th, and again, we have a day where there's no exact outer planet transits. I mean, we can still be reminded that Uranus through the entire month is still trining Pluto, the revolutionary, shock, surprise, awe, awakening, the realization of learning new things. Uranus in Gemini, trining Pluto, the collective, the community, the evolutionary changes that are happening, with Neptune still in play there. I mean, this is the background of what's going on. But when we look at the 20th isolated by itself, there's really no one thing in particular that is planetarily exact today. And again, it's like having a day off. Sometimes that's the day we get sick because we have time. And so we just have to be aware that whatever occurs today may be follow up or follow through from things that we didn't have time to get to before. But we also notice that the moon moving through Libra now is moving toward its conjunction with the sun. And we do have this new moon in Libra that will occur tomorrow morning. Here we have the chart for the Libra new moon at 5:25 a.m. at 28 degrees of Libra and 22 minutes. Now, the interesting thing about this new moon is that it's kind of in a delicate position, but it's not exact in any which way. The sun and the moon have both made squares to Jupiter. They've both made oppositions to Chiron and Eris, the sun over the last few days, the moon over the last few hours. And they are both going toward making squares with Pluto, the moon, over the next few hours. In fact, the moon will make its exact square to Pluto at 11:28 a.m. Today, but not until it moves from Libra into Scorpio, and it will do that at 8:42 a.m. So we're realizing here that there's another round of transition going on, and yet this is also stirring up things because the sun will follow over the next couple of days in its shift from Libra into Scorpio. And as the sun does that, it will actually make its exact square to Pluto on the 24th. We'll get there in just a minute, but the sun's movement into Scorpio occurs tomorrow on the 22nd, and so this new moon in Libra at the end of the sign Libra is relatively unstable. It's really about a transition. And I think that this transition hopefully will stir up enough energy that will lead us into something that can be rather positive. And that's good because we're overdue. All right, so let's move this ahead to the from the 21st, where we have the moon moving, the new moon here at 5:25. And then if we move this to noon, still on October 21st, we can see that the moon has moved into Scorpio, and the moon moves into Scorpio at 8:42 a.m., and then it will square Pluto by 11:28 a.m. So this we can see is just a few minutes after the moon makes its exact square to Pluto. But like Mercury that did this last week, we see that the moon, as it's making a square to Pluto, is also making quincunxes to Neptune and to Uranus, again stirring up that feeling of adjustment irritation that a yod or a finger of God often leaves us feeling. We can also see that Jupiter is coming closer and closer to its square to Eris. Jupiter's square with Chiron is on the 23rd, and then its square with Eris is not until November 2nd. But we can see again this pattern that is unfolding, and yet there's something really positive unfolding behind this. And that is that we're moving into a grand water trine that I'd mentioned earlier, as Mercury and Mars, but first Mercury is moving closer and closer towards trining Jupiter and also trining Saturn and Neptune. Another thing, though, that happens here on the 21st, actually, it's on the 22nd, at noon on the 21st, we can see that Neptune is retrograde, and it is at 0 degrees of Aries and 1 minute. That's 1/60th of a degree from being at 0 degrees Aries, 0 minutes, which is just barely ready to move back into Pisces. And if we move this ahead from the 21st to the 22nd at noon, we can see now that Neptune is at 29 degrees of Pisces in 59 minutes. I spoke about this at the very beginning because it's now like where this is déjà vu all over again. We're back in something that we thought was done, it was over, and yet for the next few days, actually for the rest of the month and even on through much of November, until Neptune turns direct and starts moving forward again. It just feels like we're caught up in some old rhythm that we just can't quite get out of. This is on October 22nd. By the way, Neptune backs up into Pisces exactly at 2:50 a.m. on the 22nd. We also have the sun at 29 degrees of Libra, ready to change signs, making its quincunx as it does. The sun at noon is at 29 degrees of Libra, but the sun then moves into Scorpio at 8:50 p.m. and it is making its quincunx with Neptune at 29 degrees and 59 minutes of Pisces. It makes that quincunx at 8:26 p.m. It then moves into Scorpio at 8:50 p.m. and then it makes a quincunx with Uranus. Again, it's now at that same point of that yod, that finger of God, with the Neptune Uranus trine that was aiming first at Mercury back at the beginning of the month, and then at the moon, and now at the sun. And again, this is about the irritation, the annoyance, the inability to make things okay, especially because there's deeper things connecting here, deeper things going on. If we move this ahead one more day to the 23rd, we can see that the sun now in Scorpio is really making that quincunx yod much tighter, much more exact. And it's also now the sun is making a square to Pluto. And we have that same pattern of the Uranus-Pluto trine and the sun square to Pluto and the sun quincunx to Uranus. And this is things are working and not working at the same time. And we have now the moon leading that pack in Scorpio, moving through the grand water trine. This is different than the grand air trine, which was about self-sufficient thinking. Now we're looking at kind of self-referential emotional states where we feel contained, maybe, and that moon in Scorpio making its trines with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and first though with the Jupiter in Cancer, and it does that throughout the morning today. It makes the trine to Jupiter at 10:18 a.m. But this is a flow of energy, and flows of energy are neither good nor bad, or they can be both good and bad. It just depends what energy is flowing. The other thing that happens though now is that the moon at 9:18 p.m. moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius, where our ideals kind of become more in focus, our the sense of the future, our hope, our inspiration. I think this can be a bit uplifting. And let's move ahead here from the 23rd to the 24th, when we now see that the sun is just past its square to Pluto. That occurred at 6:24 a.m. This is a tough one. This can be a firing up of hostility, of anger, of resentment coming out in the open once again, especially with the grand water trine now building, with Mercury making its trine to Jupiter, and then coming into the trines to Saturn and Neptune. Mars also coming into the trine to Jupiter. These trines all theoretically should be positive or could be positive, but it also can be a flow of energy that we don't seem to be able to stop. And so here on October 4th, we have an interesting set of energy, with Mercury making the exact trine to Jupiter at 8:07 a.m. and then making its exact trine to Saturn at 2:16 p.m. tomorrow. Let's move this ahead now to the 25th, where we can see Mercury now making the trine to Saturn. 20 at noon, it's 25 degrees and 59 minutes, but the exact trine is at 2:16 p.m. to Saturn. We also have um, the Mars getting closer and closer to its trine to Jupiter, there's some optimism cooking here behind all of the noise, all of the things that aren't working. In fact, when we go to the 26th, we can see that by noon, the moon has moved into Capricorn. It's time to get serious again. The moon actually shifts into Capricorn at just before 10 o'clock on Sunday, the 26th at 9:53 a.m. And the moon in Capricorn really is a let's get down to business. But the other thing that's happening here on the 26th is that Venus in mid Libra is making a sesqui square with Uranus that was exact just after midnight on the morning of Sunday, the 26th, which again can stir up our needs, our wants, our tastes, our what we like, what we're attracted to. And that can be lovely, but it also can get us into trouble. We need to be careful about how we move with this energy on the 26th. As we move to the 27th, we can see that the moon is still moving through Capricorn on the 27th, but we also now have Mars coming behind Mercury, now making its exact trine to Jupiter, while Mercury is moving close to its trine to Neptune. Remember, Mercury trine Saturn yesterday. It'll trine Neptune on the 29th. But meanwhile, we have Mars trining Jupiter, and this can again be overconfidence. This is exuberance. This is like the feeling an athlete has before heading out onto the field to play a game that it's sure it's going to win. We have a real sense of too much confidence here, which can be very useful, but it also can be a bit dangerous because remember, we also have Jupiter making those exact squares to Chiron and Eris. The exact square to Chiron was back on the 23rd, and the exact square to Eris is not till November 2nd, but we're still right in the middle of that period of time. And so we have this grand water trine cooking with Jupiter squaring Chiron and Eris that in turn are being quincunxed. That again, that's the aspect of irritation, annoyance by Mars here in particular. But again, these are complicated energies, but there's something potentially positive cooking behind all of this stuff. And I think we're rounding a bend here, but we're not quite there yet. That is October 27th. As we move to the 28th, we have the moon on the 28th at 25 degrees of Capricorn, but the moon will move into Aquarius just before 9 p.m. on Tuesday, the 28th. And then it will align with Pluto, which is where we started October. And again, we have this sense of the volatility heating up here as the moon moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. Um, and we also have Mercury getting closer and closer to its trine to Neptune. In fact, let's move this ahead to the 29th, and we can see that Mercury has just now passed its trine to Neptune. It was exact this morning on the 29th, just 26 minutes after midnight. But then Mercury moved into Sagittarius also early this morning at 4:02 a.m. And there's this sense of the potential, the optimism, the things maybe can go right if we can figure out how to do it. And we also have Mars today making its exact trine with Saturn. Remember earlier on this month we had the square and a half from Mars to Saturn, and I said how difficult that energy was. Well, now as Mars is trining Saturn, we have the opportunity to organize reality, to take complex things and put them into order and work with that energy, while Mercury in Sagittarius is giving us some newfound hope. I think that the month can end on a high note. We also have Mercury, though, as it moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius today on the 29th, it will also make an opposition to Uranus. And I think here we're seeing something coming out into the open that can no longer be hid. Something maybe that we already knew, but we have some, I think, some potential magic occurring, especially since that Mercury is also now making a sextile with Pluto. The complicated energy that's been hidden, that's deep, I think now has the potential of doing something really positive. Mercury makes that exact sextile with Pluto tomorrow on the 30th. And let's move this ahead to the 30th, and we can see that Mercury at 1 degree of Sagittarius is now making that exact sextile with Pluto. That's exact at 3:05 p.m. But we also have today on the 30th, we also have the moon late this evening moving through latter degrees of Aquarius and making a square to Mars before it changes signs, which it will do early on the 31st. And the 31st is All Hallows Eve, Halloween. And we have the moon moving into Pisces at 4:45 a.m., making a square to Uranus, stirring up some intense energy, making a square to Mercury and Mars, as Mercury and Mars are opposing Uranus. I think that there's some real energy being stirred up here. We're still working on that grand water trine, though, with Mars still coming into its trine to Neptune, having already trined Jupiter and Saturn. But that energy of that grand water trine, of that kind of flowing emotional energy, is still with us. And I think that the month ends not only with the moon kind of exacerbating that energy, making a square to Uranus and a square to Mercury, as they are opposing one another. That was exact the day before yesterday. But we're also seeing the moon in Pisces coming up to its trine to the sun. That is exact at 8:42 p.m., which might, on some levels, signal a good evening of trick-or-treating for those who partake. There's a sense of a balance, a harmony between the sun and the moon this evening that hopefully will at least be a little bit of a relief in an otherwise very complicated month. Also might mention that we have Venus, which I've been talking about, coming into its square to Jupiter and its opposition to Chiron and Eris. That really occurs the beginning of November, but we can see that beginning to come into being with Venus only a couple of degrees away right now from its squares, from its oppositions to Chiron and Eris, and its square to Jupiter. So that's it. It's a pretty dynamic month. And yet, oddly enough, it still may feel that we end the month kind of where we started it. I mean, there's certainly a lot of change in in the flow of events here, but until Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus and Chiron and Eris all turn direct, which they will one at a time over the weeks and months ahead. Um, in fact, Saturn turns direct at the end of November. Uranus doesn't. Uranus will turn direct in early February. And what are we missing here? Chiron will turn direct on January 2nd. Eris will turn direct on January 11th. And as these outer planets, one by one, turn direct again, we will begin to see real movement forward. Until then, we need to remember that what we do today may not have obvious and apparent ramifications, but those long-term consequences and ramifications will occur not only from what we do now, but from what we say now. but also from what we don't do or what we don't say. That's it for now. I'll see those of you who are at the $3 a month level in Patreon for a mid-month update. And with that, I will end by saying, as I always do, think cosmically, act locally, because it doesn't do any good at all to think cosmically unless you apply what you learn cosmically on a very local level. That's it. Rick Levine, peace out.